Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So it's time for another weekly update and I have 7 books to talk to you about today that I've finished since the last weekly update. So we will go ahead and get started and work our way up from the lowest to the highest rated. So the first 3-star book I'll talk about is Lipstick Voodoo by Kristi Charish. So this is the second book in this Kincaid Strange series, which is generally about a voodoo practitioner who lives in Seattle. So here, Kincaid is called in to help the Seattle police solve a cold case. We also have this plot where people from her ghost friend's past start mysteriously dying. And so they're trying to, so Kincaid is trying to figure out not only what's going on in this cold case, but, you know, what is happening and is her ghost friend in danger? I think this is mostly enjoyable. I really do like this general premise with the zombies and other entities, and I do think we get some new types of entities here, which is really fun, and so I think it kind of develops the lore a bit more, but at the same time I'm I feel like this is kind of just surface level and it could really continue to go deeper into this. I also just like how Kristi Charish kind of embraces the 90s grunge, I guess, from Seattle. It feels pretty atmospheric, I guess. I think this overall mystery was pretty decent. Definitely didn't suspect the culprit, so that was nice, but at the same time, I don't know, it started off great, but then my interest just kind of waned over the course of the book, and I'm not entirely sure why. I don't know if it's the pacing that I have problems with or what exactly, and this is kind of what also happened with the first book. I want to love it so much more than I actually do. I do think Kincaid is maybe not the most likable protagonist I've ever encountered, and I did get annoyed by her at times. There's, I think, a lot of people telling her hey, maybe you should tell this sorcerer's ghost that you're kind of involved with about this particular situation, and she's like, no, I don't want to do that, and then just repeats that over and over and over through the course of the book. I'm like, oh my god, just tell him already. So that got a little frustrating for sure, but yeah, I mean, this was fine. I do wish I had liked it more, but I think it's still a pretty interesting setting, and there are some aspects that I really do like, especially with the zombies. I'm conflicted a little bit about continuing this series. I've rated both the first 2 books 3 stars, and I've heard that the third one is the last one and it kind of ends abruptly because I think the publisher canceled the series or something like that. So I don't know. I haven't decided if I want to just finish it up or not. The next 3-star book I'll talk about is A Tooth Fairy's Promise by Michael J. Adams. So I did receive this for a review from the author, and this is another urban fantasy where we follow a tooth fairy private investigator who must find some missing children. So I think, it's definitely quick to read. It's not particularly long, and there's a lot of action going on. I think it was a really interesting take on the Tooth Fairy that I haven't really seen before. I really liked this kind of bone magic manipulation that we get. I think that's very interesting. This Tooth Fairy aspect comes in because our main character, being a Tooth Fairy, can track people with bones. And so there's a bit of swallowing baby teeth to find these missing children, which on one hand I'm teeth kind of creep me out, but on the other I think that's a really interesting, unique idea. There's also this kind of super cool multiverse theory, and I liked how there are rules for how Tiff, our main character, can stay in our world because technically she is an outsider, one of these fairies. I also like how she uses her powers for good after this kind of tragic backstory that she has. We have an interesting villain here as well. It definitely does end on a cliffhanger though, but I do think book 2 was either already released or comes out this month. I could be slightly off on that. I do think the writing is a little bit simplistic at times, but it does make it really quick to read. I also think some of the side characters blended together a bit, and I had some trouble distinguishing them because they all just kind of felt very similar. I don't know if it would have felt stronger, I think, about it if it was slightly longer and gives us a little bit more time to really develop things, but it was still a fun time overall. The next 3-star book I'll talk about is The Invasion of the Tearling by Erika Johansen. So I did this as a buddy read with Kat from Brews and Reviews, and this is the second book in the Tearling series. I think it's called the Tearling series. But we follow Kelsey, who is now the queen, as she obviously deals with this invasion from the Red Queen, as well as this mysterious connection that she has with a woman before the crossing. So I thought this was an interesting sequel, and there's I don't know, it's kind of strange because there's a lot of things that I really liked, but a lot of things I really hated. And so that's kind of, why we get this 3-star rating in the middle. Yeah, it was just an interesting experience. I absolutely love these sections that we get with Lily, who is this woman in the like pre-crossing times. And it's this like dystopian setting that reminds me a lot of like Handmaid's Tale, where, you know, we have women who don't really have that many rights, and it's just kind of a bleak society. I like actually ended up preferring these sections to Kelsey's and you know, like what everything else going on in like the post-crossing Tearling times. Like, it's really brutal and dark at times, but it's also fascinating to actually learn more about what happened in this world, because it's like the post-crossing times feel almost like a high fantasy, and so you have like a lot of interesting mixes of genres, like this dystopian, and it's kind of like, you know, with book one, I was like, how in the world did we even get here? I did like getting some answers here about how, you know, like what exactly the crossing was and what happened to this world. So I really liked that part. I did find these sections to be really fast-paced. The rest, like I mentioned, is kind of a mixed bag, though. I feel like there's a lot of plot threads introduced here, and some of them just don't seem to go anywhere. So I don't know if they'll actually like be resolved in the last book or what exactly. Still sort of feels like a lot of setup, and it's like this really slow build, and I'm not really sure where this story is ultimately going. It's also strange, like I was talking to Kat about this, like it feels like each chapter has a lot of stuff going on, but then when I like look at the overall picture, I'm like, well, nothing has really happened, and it feels like there's just kind of a lot of filler. And there's definitely less action than I expected, especially for this being called, like, the invasion of the Tearling. Like, I thought we would have more battle scenes and things, and, like, we do get a little bit of that, but not nearly as much as I expected. So another thing that, like, just really, really bothered me is I hated Kelsey in this book, and it's just such a shame, because I thought she was such a great protagonist in the first book, and here it's like I feel like we've just lost all of her great character development. So she becomes like someone who I just don't find very likable whatsoever, and I feel like even the other characters around her are kind of like, you've changed a lot, and like we don't really support you all that much. Without having read the third book, like I don't know what's going to happen there, but I just, like, maybe there are reasons for this change, but it's just really jarring, because I thought, you know, in the first book she was really relatable, down to earth, and now, like, I get that she's, like, stressed having to deal with this invasion and everything, but I don't know, she makes some decisions where I'm like, that was incredibly stupid, and you're being, like, super selfish, and I just, like, genuinely don't like you. So, that was really unfortunate. We definitely have, like, a lot of heavier themes here, so there's like definitely content warnings for things like rape, self-harm, homophobia, and sexism. I don't know, I feel so conflicted about this, because yeah, like I said, like I really liked the parts with Lily. I thought those were fantastic, and so I'm like, I think Kat and I are planning on finishing up this trilogy, so I'm like curious to see what exactly happens, but I really hope Kelsey kind of redeems herself, because yeah, not a fan of her in this book at all. So now we'll move to the 3.5-star books, and the first one I'll talk about here is Only Ashes Remain by Rebecca Schaeffer. So this is the second book in this, I think it's called the Market of Monsters series. But this is a YA, like, dark urban fantasy where our main character Nita is recovering after being sold on this like monster black market, and she is kind of like, I need to make everybody fear me in order to be safe. So I thought this was an enjoyable continuation to the series, that I don't think I felt as strongly about it as I did about book one. I mean, like, granted, it's still really good. I just think I preferred book one slightly more. I think it's pretty fast-paced overall, and I did want to keep reading throughout. I really love this premise, though. I think there's a lot of really interesting cryptids, including ones that I haven't necessarily heard of before, so I adore that. Like, I always love learning about cryptids and just different, like, I don't know, powers and things like that. Like, I think that's super fascinating. I will say, like, this is really dark, especially for a YA book. I really enjoy this because I think it's quite different from what you normally see, and there's definitely some content warnings here for things like torture and a lot of violence and gore. So, you know, there are scenes where it's just like, okay, there's like blood everywhere. All right, you know, like I'm on board for this, but yeah, it's definitely a darker take on things. We also have like several morally gray characters. I like just seeing the different rules that they set out for themselves for, like, you know, like I cannot cross this boundary for myself, otherwise, you know, like I'll be completely evil. I think it makes for a lot of really interesting, like, internal conflicts. We are now in Toronto, so that was, you know, a fun new location. It's definitely, you know, just enjoyable to explore this, as well as we get to kind of go into a little bit more detail about this, like, supernatural government agency type thing. So we learn more about the agents, and I think they will play like a larger role in the next book is my guess. The characters, again, are really interesting. I like seeing how they try to balance like the things that they need in order to survive, as well as like their desires, and just kind of dealing with these things, as well as, you know, finding a good balance with like what the other person is comfortable with. It's definitely a process, and I think it actually does go somewhere, so that's like really satisfying to see, and I definitely can't wait to see this relationship in particular evolve even more. Our main character, Nita, is definitely driven by this desire for vengeance, and she does have a tendency to kind of like leap into things without thinking. It's like kind of enjoyable to see how she like tries not to listen to people's advice, and she, you know, she's incredibly stubborn, but she starts to like kind of come around on this, and, you know, I think we just have some really great character growth. I'm definitely invested in this series. Like, I think there are some new mysteries to solve with like some of the plot threads brought up here, so I definitely want to keep going with it. The next 3-star book I'll talk about is Come Tumbling Down by Seanan McGuire. So this is, I think, the 5th installment of the Wayward Children series, and this is like urban fantasy, portal fantasy type stuff. We're going back to the moors, which is the setting we visited in book 2, I think. So something terrible has happened to Jack, and she and her friends essentially just have to fix it. So I think this was generally good overall. I really liked returning to the moors. It was one of my favorite settings. It's kind of like this gothic type setting where it's like a lot of like classic monster movies like Frankenstein or Dracula. Like, I kind of picture it in like black and white, and, you know, it's just kind of like ominous and mysterious. So I really like that setting. I think that's really fun. I enjoyed the addition of the drowned gods here, even though, like, I don't know, it's kind of strange because, like, I don't tend to like Lovecraftian type stuff, but I feel like the drowned gods are almost like that. So I'm like, well, what am I doing here? Why do I like them so much? I don't know. But I generally liked the villagers who kind of worship these drowned gods, and just seeing, you know, we have some sea beasties, and there's like water powers, which I really enjoyed. The story in general is quick to read, but I don't think it's my favorite installment. I think I like books 2 and 4 the best. It was still better than some of the other ones that I read. The characters are fine. I do generally like Jack and Jill, but I just feel like they weren't quite as strong as they were when they were first introduced. I don't particularly care for Sumi, who's like one of these wayward children, and Sumi is from a nonsense world, which I think I don't really like all that much, so that could have something to do with it. But I found her to be really irritating. The others, like, who joined them on this, like, quest to, you know, save the day, I kind of don't feel like they were really necessary to be there. This is such a strange series because, like, I love Seanan McGuire's work, but I just don't find the Wayward Children series as a whole to be, like, particularly satisfying, especially compared to her other books. And, like, I don't know if it's just because they are shorter, but I think I do prefer the stories that are more like backstories instead of continuing things more in like the present day timeline, which is kind of what this is. You know, like books 2 and 4 are definitely backstories, and I loved those ones a lot more. So yeah, I don't know. I think this is kind of a mixed bag. And like, I know it gets a lot of love on book 2, but like, I think her other books are a lot better. So I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on this. Like, I still enjoyed my time with it and would recommend it if it sounds interesting to you. But yeah, I think there are some things that work for me with the series and some that don't. So now we'll move to the 4-star books, and the only one I'll talk about here is Fangs by Andersen. So this is a collection of comics about this love story between a vampire and a werewolf. So, I mean, it's really short, so this is not going to be a long review, but I thought this was just really adorable. It's not really like a full story. Like, I kind of went in expecting that to be more like a graphic novel, like, you know, telling a full, complete story throughout, but it's really just more like a collection of small vignettes, I think. But these are really fun. Like, it's just a fun time. I mean, obviously it's really quick to read. I think there are a lot of really silly jokes kind of about vampire and werewolf stereotypes, and they worked really well. There's some pretty entertaining moments, like we have the werewolf seeing a squirrel and going after it. So it's like, I don't know, I think it works really well together, and there were definitely several times where I just like laughed and kind of snorted. So it's like, if you're wanting like a really cute, quick comic read, like, I would definitely pick this up. The last book I'll talk about today is a 4.5-star read, and that's A Stranger in Town by Kelley Armstrong. So this is, I think, the 6th book of this Rockton series, which is a mystery thriller series, and In this particular novel, we have fewer residents moving to Rockton. Our main character, Casey, thinks that there's something bigger happening than just like the natural swing of things. We have this injured hiker who appears, who's the sole survivor of a hostile attack, and Casey has to just solve this mystery as well as like ultimately what's going on with this town. So I think this was enjoyable. I don't know if the particular plot of this was my favorite compared to the others, but I still like obviously really enjoyed it. I think it's pretty fast-paced and interesting throughout. There were some more meandering moments here than the other books from what I remember. I continue to really like the setting. We have this like isolated kind of town. It's pretty small in the Yukon, and it makes for some tense moments because of this isolation, especially I think when moving through settings like the forest, when they're tracking things, like it's cold, and I think it does a really good job of like evoking that atmosphere. I also just like this general idea behind the town where, you know, people who are trying to get away from things, whether it be like criminal or if they're like trying to escape like an abusive situation, they can pay to get into this town. And I think you have a lot of like interesting character dynamics because of this mix of people. We do learn more, I think, about the founding of the town, and we get some questions answered. It's not what I expected, so I had like a really great time with this. It feels like it's kind of building to something big that really threatens the future of Rockton, so I'm very excited to see where this goes. There's, I think, a lot of twists and turns here. Some are more on the insane side of things, I think. There's some spectacularly tense, like, oh shit moments, especially there's one in particular with some bears. I'll leave it at that, but I was just like, oh boy, oh, it was exciting. I continue to like Casey. She's really tough, and I can definitely respect her abilities to do her job as this detective. I also continue to like Dalton. He's really steadfast, and I think Casey and Dalton work really well together. I also like seeing Casey's relationship with April continue to kind of like make some progress with healing. And also, like, yay, we continue to have Storm, the Newfoundland dog, and I just love, you know, I love Storm. She's always a great companion, so I had a really great time with this, and I would definitely recommend this series as a whole. So those are all the books that I finished. Some of them are definitely on the shorter side of things, which I think is kind of nice to just like break things up between these giant chunky fantasy books that I'm reading. Speaking of which, you know, currently reading this dude, A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. I have 100 pages left, so I'm definitely going to finish it today. I don't know, I mean, like, I'll kind of keep it brief since, you know, I don't want to have to like repeat myself since I'm like almost done, and, you know, I don't want this to get boring with what I'm going to say next week. But I have just like forgotten how weirdly addictive this series is. I think there are definitely like some repetitive things going on, but at the same time I'm like really enjoying that because it allows for Nesta, our main character, to kind of grow more. I had kind of forgotten about like how much our characters deal with like recovering from trauma in this series. So that's like been kind of intense, but I have very much enjoyed seeing Nesta's journey throughout this. Like, I didn't really like her in the original trilogy, but now I'm kind of like coming around on her. So, you know, with these last 100 pages, some like big things have just happened, and I like cannot wait to see them resolved. So definitely having a good time with this one. And I will say, like, I wasn't a fan of the cover change, I'll be honest. Like, I much prefer the other covers. And with this one in particular, I'm like, why would you choose orange and gray? Like, that's a very strange color combination, but I will say, in person, it doesn't look as bad as I feared, so, you know, that's something. But other than that, I am not sure what I'm going to get into this weekend. I have a couple of arcs from NetGalley that I would like to read soon because 2 of them release on March 2nd. And I need to, you know, I'd like to get my reviews posted, but those are more like sci-fi thriller. But I'm really excited for both of them. It's Forget Me Not by Alexandra Oliva and Machinehood by S.B. Divya, I think. I think that'll do it for today, so let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. And if you've made it this far, feel free to drop a vampire or werewolf emoji. I don't know if those exist, or some sort of just like general monster emoji. I think that would be fun. I do have a Discord channel, and if you want to join that, the link is in the description below. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, as that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.